So far, we've just been drawing basic lines here inside of Illustrator, but now it's time to sort of take it to the next level and start working with shapes. And inside of Illustrator, we actually have several different shapes that we can draw with. I'm going to click and hold right here where it says the ellipse tool in my toolbar, and you can see here I have rectangles, rounded rectangles, ellipses, polygons, stars, and flares. Now we're going to cover polygons, stars, and flares a little bit later on in the course, but for now let's just worry about rectangles and ellipses. So let's start off with the rectangle tool, which as you can see when I select it, it actually has a keyboard shortcut associated with it of the letter M. And that's something that I haven't really pointed out. Anytime you're using the tools over here in the tools panel and you see a letter inside of parentheses, that means that's the key on your keyboard that you can hit in order to gain access to that tool very quickly and easily without having to leave the confines of the document window. So I'm going to select this rectangle tool, go to the File menu and select New, and I'm going to make sure that I have a landscape orientation document. Doesn't matter how big or how small, I just want it to be wide so it takes up a good portion of my screen. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start drawing out rectangles. All you do is click and drag with your mouse and you will actually see a preview of the rectangle as you draw it. You can make the rectangle as big or as small as you want it to be. It can be wide, it can be narrow. Anything you want can be done just by clicking and dragging this around. You can also use the modifier keys to make this do different things. So for instance, you can use the Shift key to make sure you're drawing a perfect square. You notice even when I'm up here like this, drawing this long rectangle, if I hold down the Shift key in the middle of that, my rectangle turns into a square. Release the Shift key, it goes back. Square, rectangle. Pretty simple. Now, in addition to that, I can also hold down the Option key. If I hold down the Option key, it's going to draw out the rectangle from the center point of wherever I started to draw the shape. So in this case, I started in the top left corner, so it actually draws out from the top left corner around that center point. Why might you want to do that? Well, a lot of people sometimes want to put things directly in the center of an artboard. So let me remove this shape by pressing the Delete key, and I'll come right here to the center point of the artboard. I know it's the center point because I can actually see it right here when I get to the center. You see that little thing that says center? That indicates I'm at the center point. So now I can hold down the Option key on the Mac, the Alt key on the PC, click and drag out from the middle. If I hold down the Shift key, it will actually draw a perfect square directly in the middle of the document. Then I can release my mouse and release my keys. That enables me to draw that rectangle or that square directly in the middle of the document each and every time. Now you'll notice whenever I draw out a square or a rectangle that there are these little dots that appear in the corners of the square and the rectangle. Those indicate corner controls. You are actually able to go in and click and drag these corners to round off the corners of the rectangle that you're drawing. So in this case, I can round off the corners just like that. There's also a rounded rectangle tool inside of Illustrator that allows you to draw out a rectangle just like this. As you are drawing with that, you can use the same keyboard shortcut that we use to increase the spiral rings to increase or decrease the amount of rounding on the corners. So for instance, I could press the up arrow key. You see how this gets more round and more round each time I do it. I could also hold down the down arrow key as I'm drawing and it will turn it back into a perfect square. So you can round or straighten these corners just by holding down a modifier key. Once you release the mouse, you still have those corner controls, so if you accidentally gave it too much of a rounding, you can just unround it by clicking and dragging outward. If you have a specific amount of rounding that you'd like to apply, you can double-click one of these circles, and you will enter the Transform panel, and more specifically, the Rectangle Properties down here at the bottom. And so inside of the rectangle properties, these are the corner controls down here at the bottom. So you can actually specify how much you want each corner to be rounded. If you want to round them all at the same amount, you can make sure that this link is connected right here. If you want to round them independently, you can break the link and then change the amount of rounding on each corner. So for instance, I'll set this one to 0, and let's set this one to 0, and then let's change this one to 15 and this one to 15. And so now, if I grab my selection tool and just click anywhere on the canvas so we can see this a little better, I've got a pointed corner here, rounded corner here, and rounded corner here. If I don't like that, I can select the shape again, go back into the properties, link them up, and then all I have to do is make one change to this, and you see that they all start to round, but these don't match this. So what do? Well, what I actually have to do now is break this. Let's reset them. Here we go. 15, 15, 15, not 51, 15 and 15. And then let's lock them back, and that way everything is in sync again. Pretty straightforward. Now, in addition to squares and rectangles, you can also draw circles or ellipse shapes inside of Illustrator. So let me close the transform panel for a moment. Let's come back over here, click and hold on the tools and grab the ellipse tool, or you can simply press the letter L on your keyboard and it will give you the ellipse tool. Once I have the ellipse tool selected, I can come out and just start drawing these round shapes. Now, if you wanted, you could actually draw out a perfect circle by holding down the Shift key. You'll also notice as I start to draw, do you see those green lines that keep appearing on my artboard? Those are smart guides, indicating different areas that I'm snapping to. So for instance, right now, if I were to let go, I would be directly in line with the center point of that small ellipse down there at the bottom. If I wanted to be in line with, let's say, the side, I would drag it out to here, or even this other side, I would go to here. And you can see this is a great way to visually line up all of the elements that you're drawing inside of Illustrator. So I highly recommend making use of the smart guides, because that's a great way to find the center point of an object, just like this, and then draw out something, holding down the Option or Alt key like that. So I can just draw out multiple circles that are all directly in the center of each other, making it easy for me to draw patterns and targets and all that kind of stuff directly on the artboard. Then we can select all of those, press delete on the keyboard, and they go away. So holding down the Option or Alt key draws out from the center. Always remember that. Holding down the Shift key draws perfect squares and perfect circles. And then also don't ever forget about those corner controls, because they come in really handy, especially when you're drawing out rounded rectangles for buttons and UI elements in web pages and things like that. So there you go. That's how you work with the ellipse tool and also the rectangle tools here inside of Illustrator. And just remember that, practice these a little bit, because we're going to be using these several times throughout the rest of the course.